What's up? Welcome to a new episode of Movie Schmovie. This is episode number 318. This is a very special episode where we're going to go over the final three Nightmare on Elm Street films in our Watch 'Em All series. But before we get to that, I'm Steve. I'm one of the co-hosts, and I'm here as always with
Ron
and John.
That they are. This little endeavor that we've done to get through this franchise is taking longer than some of our other ones. It feels like. But we are wrapping this up in the month of October, which is kind of fun because it's nice to watch spooky movies in the spookiest month of the year. Whether they're good or bad movies, we'll soon discuss. But and I think we've seen these movies before. I know, Ronald, you said you hadn't really seen them. I mean, I know I definitely have. John has, but you've watched some of these for the first time, Ronald. So it'll be exciting. I'm excited to really just kind of get your raw take on watching them as an adult for the first time, as a part of, what could be deemed homework for your podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, so it's good. We're going to wrap this up. We're going to get three different movies. We're going to be going over Wes Craven's New Nightmare, Freddy vs. Jason, and the Nightmare on Elm Street remake. Basically, what is that? Like over the course of like 16 years, 16, 17 years, these three movies kind of came out. And in a lot of ways, they couldn't be more different from one another. I think John or somebody mentioned on our text thread, like these three are interesting to talk about together because there are three very different approaches to ways in which to prolong this franchise or try to, keep it fresh and keep it in, on people's minds and in the box office, I guess, in some way. But I guess I'm curious, like, what did you guys think going into watching these three? I know, Ron, like I said, you're kind of new to them. John, like, any feelings about these before you rewatch them, or where were you for this last watch them all effort that we're doing here?
I'm curious. I was curious about tonally.
For a second, I thought you said you're furious.
I said a fit.
I thought you said you're furious. I was just, I've sensed a little bit of like a reluctance on your part to watch these movies. And so for a second, I thought you said, I'm furious.
I'm furious. And I'm mad at you fuckers for letting me. No. So I was curious because Wes Craven hadn't really touched these films for quite some time. And then New Nightmare comes. And I'm wondering about the feelings that I get, the tone that I get with this one. And funny enough, you can see kind of the infancy of Scream and New Nightmare, where it's like this kind of deconstruction of whatever it is that he's tackling at the time. And it must have been because of complete exhaustion from the genre. It felt like when I was watching this one, in comparison to all the other ones, Freddy versus Jason is kind of like an homage to both properties, but New Nightmare in particular felt like it was Wes Craven saying, I'm sick of doing this shit. I'm sick of people eating off of this whole property, and I'm going to try something a little different, a little more self-aware, a little crazy, and he goes for it. And I like that about it. I actually wound up liking that movie a lot more than I thought. So that's the first feeling I got. The Freddy versus Jason and the remake, I didn't really have such an attachment to so much as Wes Craven
curiosity.
Wes Craven touching this one felt a little more special.
Right. What about you, John?
I have seen these movies before. The remake was the one I'd only seen once before, and relatively recently, to the extent that I wondered if I would watch it again. And so I have to admit, I kind of scanned through it.
Right.
Because I'd seen it recently enough, but I stopped and watched more of it than I thought I would do. But
do you hold your remote like this? Or do you hold it like this? Are you like one of these? Are you one of these? Are you?
Oh, no. I'm definitely a
Steve.
No, I'm a thumber.
You're a thumb. I'm a thumber.
I'm a
too.
thumber.
Who the hell uses an index finger on a remote?
That seems like
I've seen people do it
lose a little control. You're just kind of
You're
Billy bobbing around. I don't know.
I'm just gonna just drop it. Like I can't even hold on to it.
So you fast forwarded with your thumb. You're just
yes. No, I was going through and I was like stopping when I was like, oh yeah, I wanted to make sure I was watching the deaths and I was watching the plot turns and I was catching some of the, because then I was like, oh yes, I remember this. I had not forgotten much. Honestly, it was not long ago at all. New Nightmare, I watched again. It was the third or fourth time I'd seen it. I saw it when it came out. Maybe I saw it again after that, like when it hit home video and VHS, I mean, back in the day. And then I watched it a few months ago, maybe a year ago even, and then watched it this morning. So like that one, and then Freddy versus Jason, I must have seen, somewhere in the same neighborhood 3 or 4 times total, and I watched it again. And that was the one I was really wanting to pay the most attention to, though, because I had not seen it recently, and it's the one that's the most loaded. It's got a lot of ground to cover. I want to say a couple things that are interesting about that. You mentioned, Steve, the kind of range of these movies being a 16-year range. What's interesting is, and Ronald, you mentioned that like, oh, they took like so long off and then Wes Craven came back. There's a couple things I want to say there. One is it's kind of funny that it feels like a long time in your memory sometimes between movies, between sequels in a franchise. Oh, they finally came back and made another one. Yeah. And you'll look now and you'll be like, that was 3 or 4 years. That doesn't seem like anything to me now.
Right.
That was a 3-year break, wasn't it? I mean, let me see if I'm right about this. Yes.
Yeah,
Freddy's Dead was 91. New Nightmare, the first movie we're going to be talking about today, came out in 94. But to me, even at the time, it felt like, boy, it's been a long time since they've done anything with Freddy, But the other thing is the first 6 movies come out across like 6 or 7, maybe 8 years. And then the next 3 attempts take place over 16 years. That goes to show both that they couldn't quite get anything that had the traction, or they just whatever. It's debatable whether New Nightmare was intended to launch a new franchise or whether it was intended to be kind of an epilogue almost. But I just think they obviously want to do something with this property. And I think they, even now, people talk about it like, well, clearly they're going to do something with it. Like we're just in an age where it seems like too much of a valuable piece of IP. And I hate to put it that way, but I guess I don't hate it that much because I did it and I'll do it again. But like, I think that it is like a brand that means something, even if nobody alive really remembers what's great about it, or it thinks it's great, or if after you watch all 7, 8, 9, however many movies this is, 9, that you can't possibly say this is like a great franchise, but maybe you can say it's a recognizable brand. It's an iconic character. And I think that, it's tough to say, like, is it a little bit of like a recasting Indiana Jones kind of thing where it's like, Robert Englund is kind of Freddy Krueger. And I do think one of the things you see in the remake is that's one of the things that's going to be hard for anybody to get over, that hurdle of like, if you're going to bring this thing back without him. I think it can be done, but I don't know. It's questionable to me, like what I would want from this. And I guess maybe at the end of this episode, we can all talk a little bit about what we want, what we would like to see if this thing were to continue. But we have the original director coming back to do something different. We have a sort of fulfillment of a promise of we're going to have Freddy and Jason fight because it's like King Kong versus Godzilla and it's a modern version. And I don't think they could let go of the fun idea of that. And then we have like an attempt, I would say a misguided attempt to do like a grounded, truly scary, quote unquote, remake. And, they're all very different. And I don't know, does anybody, which of these movies is the most successful, do you think? Just a quick poll.
Maybe New Nightmare, maybe? Or I'd say New Nightmare only because it's Wes Craven on it, but
it's more interesting to watch.
Yeah.
Like now it's a little bit boring though, compared to Freddy versus Jason, but Freddy versus Jason is like more interesting, but kind of dumb. And then New Nightmare is like, has got ideas, but it's a little, when it gets to the big scares, it doesn't, I don't know if it quite, I don't know. It's a mixed bag for me, but I do really admire it. I think I like, especially in the first half, I find it really interesting what they're doing and that they did it when they did it,
I think Freddy versus Jason is probably of the 3.
Yeah.
The most successful, only because of the, in varying degrees of success, kind of just bridging the gap between like 2 of the biggest horror icons, ever. And that one is probably like, we'll get into this more when we get to it, but in general, I think that's one of the, that one was very successful at the box office as well. And it was also like a crowd pleasing, to me at least, like when I saw that movie, with the Thursday midnight showing with the people that were dying to see that movie and had waited a long time for that to happen. That's like a top movie going experience for me, like across any movie that I've ever seen. Like we talked about it, all of them on this podcast, but like for horror stuff, like that's probably at the top of the list for me, because I mean, seeing those two on screen and the movie definitely plays to the audience and plays to the fans. So, I mean, I think that one for me is probably the most successful, really just for that reason alone.
I would also insert that Freddy versus Jason might be one of the better Freddy movies I've seen out of all of them.
I mean, we'll get to it. We'll get to it in a minute, like in actual order. But I think you can make a case that in terms of craftsmanship, it definitely is. It would have to rank up there. I would say the same thing about it amongst Friday the 13th movies as well. But I also think that those movies are different. Like the standard of what that is and what those movies are intended to do is different. I think the Freddy movies have always been a little bit more full of themselves in terms of like what they're trying to do, that it's a little bit like smarter or something, and it's got a little like elements to it that are different. But I don't think that necessarily bears out. I think the Friday the 13th movies are kind of these. Hold on. I have a cat that keeps wanting to bump the microphone stand, and it's annoying. But it's a jump scare. I keep getting a cat jump onto my desk and come back, and she's back again. But at any rate, I think that I think that there's something about that movie, and especially when you say like a crowd pleasing thing, Steve, that Freddy versus Jason, I think it just has a sort of, I kept thinking of pro wrestling when I was watching it. And I'm not even a person who watches pro wrestling, but I was thinking like this has a real wrestling vibe, and in the sense of too, when it builds up to the brawl, you get a couple of good brawls. You get like a dream world brawl and you get a real world brawl. And yeah, again, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Now, you mentioned, Ronald, how neat it is to see what Wes Craven had in mind for a new Nightmare, and that he had a fresh idea. Maybe just underline, like, how would you describe what this movie is, in 1994 as this kind of meta experiment?
This is 1994, and essentially what happens is the character that plays Nancy, the actress that plays Nancy, is a star of the movie, and she's living outside of sort of the stardom that came with the Nightmare on Elm Street film, which is a crazy, like, high-minded. It's just a cool idea in '94, before everything became a parody of itself or very self-aware. I feel like everything's like that now. Everything's like turning in the camera and be like, well, I don't know. There's a lot of that. And 94.
2 years later, you get Scream too.
Yes.
Right? And
okay, so I was gonna say,
and I want to say this: 2 years before that, you got Larry Sanders, the Gary Shandling show on the Gary Shandling HBO show, that was like the first real instance of celebrities of all levels coming on and playing themselves in like a self-effacing way. It created like, there's this cool zone of coming on that show and like playing an asshole version of yourself, because you are John Stamos, and but you get to be John Stamos and come in and be in on the joke of being an asshole on that show. So I really do think that informed the way that New Nightmare plays out, that like there was a framework for Heather Langenkamp. Is it Langenkamp or Langenkamp? I always trip over this.
I think it's Langenkamp.
It's a hard L. I mean, hard G.
Hard G.
So yes, Heather Langenkamp, like her coming back, I feel like she must have known, oh, this is something people are doing. Robert Englund, you can see he's definitely playing it with an arched brow. He knows like, oh, there's a framework that says you can get some juice out of doing a slightly unflattering almost portrait of yourself that people will recognize is you, but not you. And you'll get kind of credit. It's like showing up to be on the Saturday Night Live sketch about you. You get to sort of be in on the joke a little bit.
I'm gonna name an old movie that this is not by any means the same movie, but there are only a couple of things that existed back then that had that level of self-awareness, and one of them that I can think of is the Belgian movie Man Bites Dog. Have you guys ever seen that?
Yeah.
It's for anybody that has not seen this movie. I'd say it's a mockumentary / found footage film that is worth your time. And it's the first of its time that I knew that was really self-aware in that way. But this kind of takes it to a different level, man, because we all know the mythology of Freddy and Nightmare on Elm Street. So
Right.
you having that decade or so awareness of that, and then coupled with that is this movie that's directly taking a poke at it. It's pretty brave of him to do, especially since it's his baby in a way. Like I think it's cool to take the ideas that you had before and kind of fuck them up, for lack of a better term. Like,
Right.
Look at them from a different angle, I'll say.
Yeah, it feels like it's also, beyond it being him coming back to the series. And like I think John said even earlier, like the idea of kind of like making the version of Freddy that's in this quote unquote real life that these actors live in is much more in line with like the version of Freddy that you saw in A Nightmare on Elm Street, like the original film, or at least closer to it than what Freddy had become, over the course of all the other sequels that we've talked about so far. So, I mean, like that kind of ownership over the character, it does seem like, this version of Freddy Krueger that's stuck in this fictional, film, like this I don't even know what they call, I can't remember what they called it in the movie, but like, the idea that this entity is like, stuck because, the films have kind of, lost prominence, or like these things really only were relevant like when these actors were playing these characters. I think that kind of angle for the movie is very creative, and yeah, like it's like only a couple years before Scream, and the idea of like horror movies and their effect on quote unquote reality, you know what I mean? Like that's the through line to the Scream franchise, and that's definitely something that he was able to kind of play around with more, with Kevin Williamson's help. But specifically with New Nightmare, I mean, I just remember seeing the movie like when it came out, and like John mentioned it a little bit. I think the biggest thing, like even though this movie definitely had like some of the better critical reviews for like the Nightmare franchise, it's one of the lowest grossing Nightmare movies, which is interesting because I think it actually is the lowest grossing, but and I think it's just because like coming off of what was the one prior to that, Freddy's Dead, the Final Nightmare, it's like it's almost too much of a hard turn, like, you know what I mean, for the franchise fan base who may be sticking around 3 years later for something new. And I think that's the differentiation between it and then a decade later or whatever it was when Freddy vs. Jason comes out, is that movie plays right back into, I think, what a lot of the fan base maybe was looking for. But that's not really to take anything away from New Nightmare, because I really like New Nightmare. And I think that there is a lot of interesting stuff in there. Like John said, like seeing these actors who play these characters that we love and some like skewed version of this actor in this movie, it is really interesting to see Robert Englund play himself, and be aware of the impact that Freddy Krueger has on pop culture, and like doing interviews as Freddy Krueger in character, at the same time that is a Freddy Krueger, in this entity that is being basically blocked out by the character of Nancy still, so those are some pretty interesting ideas, like pretty high concept for, what is that? The seventh entry in seventh or eighth entry in a franchise. Yeah. Like that's when you're trying to be more creative and not just doing some of the things that we talked about with 5 or 6.
It's that Wes Craven. He's got ideas, I mean, he's a guy who like, and I do think him coming back and wanting to have an idea, I mean, it all fits this model of like, he's kind of critiquing what happened to the franchise. There's that one scene where he has a speech that it's almost too much, but it's like it goes from clever and then it veers into like egomania, because he's talking about how like imagine a story good enough to hold one of these spirits, because his idea is that these spirits exist. It's a little bit of a spin on what they've done. Anytime they've tried to inject supernatural stuff, the cult, the weird spirit worms, whatever it is that you bring into a slasher film to make it like seem like, this explains the killer's supernatural abilities and everything. But he's talking about how they've captured this spirit that may have existed for, eons or whatever, that it's outside of time or something. And that imagine a story good enough to capture it and hold it there, and that as long as people care about, it's kind of the same premise that Freddy goes through. As long as people are afraid of him, then he can kind of infect their dreams and he can keep having victims. And that's like a theme in those movies, that he's got to kind of find a new crop of people to be afraid of him and to keep the legend going. And Freddy versus
also
Jason
the plot
is
of the
about
never-ending story.
Direct that. Well, but what
for real?
It's interesting to see Wes Craven approach that idea, but from that egomaniacal idea of like, I'm back to kind of finish it up. But if you look at it from the kind of meta sense that he knows he's filming himself saying that, and it's like, well, maybe he's playing into a little bit that sort of pretentious idea. Like, I really like him in this movie. I think some of the acting is a little clunky of these people playing themselves, but it feels nice. You know, I don't think that Heather Langenkamp has ever been like the most dynamic actor, but she feels like Nancy, so it doesn't matter. Robert Englund is, like you said, Steve, doing a little bit of a like Hollywood version of himself, and I think that it's that slightly unflattering vision he has. Like he comes off a little bit like a coward almost in the movie, like, or at least he kind of skips town. I heard somewhere that there was supposed to be a scene that showed that he had a nightmare and that he was going to be trapped on a spider web by Freddy, who like, and it was going to be like a riff on the fly with him going like, help me. But, you know, they never shot that. But he said what they did do is like have that little bit of dialogue that explains that he like skipped town. But the idea was going to be that he was having nightmares too. And maybe even that Freddy got him, you know, this new spirit got him. But I think the way the movie plays it is perfect. This is one of the cleverest things about it, because what they have happen is Robert Englund disappears from the scene. Like he's skipped town. But that's around the time that the more physical version of the Freddy starts manifesting. So if you wanted to believe that Robert Englund is still Freddy, you could almost believe that like he got taken over and now is manifesting. You know, I don't know if that was deliberate, if that was just like, oh, we didn't have Robert Englund for more than a couple of days, and so we couldn't shoot more stuff with him. But I remembered that feeling before I knew that factoid about how there was originally a dream sequence for him. I remember thinking one of my favorite things was so the sort of thing that happens in a really good horror story where a character just sort of disappears from the background. And then you later realize how nefarious that is, that just someone isn't answering their phone, you know, like, oh shit, we haven't checked on him in a couple scenes and now he's not answering his phone. So in horror movie language, he's gone, you know. I don't know. I just thought that was kind of interesting, but I also think that it works for the story of like, no one seems to know what's going on. Like even Wes Craven, who's writing the script, is talking about it like he's writing it in a fugue state and he's not in control of it, you know. So I do like that the movie kind of doubles back on itself and sort of is the story of the making of itself, you know, like it's silly and kind of corny and on the nose, but I do think that idea is what saves it. And some of the execution of the scares, I don't know. How do we feel about the Freddy that's in this? You said it's a little closer to the first one, Steve, because they kind of simplify it and they downplay the wisecracking. But what do you think of giving him a much more of a fedora that's like green felt and then like a duster, you know, like a long trench coat? It feels like an attempt to make him cooler in a way that I don't know how I feel about
his teeth are like very like
updated Freddy.
Razor Sharpie. My issue is the pacing of this film. It's not that it has this high concept. It has nothing to do with that. It actually, I think if it had that high concept and had a kill count that started pretty much from like 10 minutes in on, then it would have been an easier sell for people. But I remember in 94, what I kept hearing as an 11-year-old kid, there's no murders in this until like the end of the movie. And that was what I heard from then till now. Every time that movie comes up, every person that's a Freddy fan is like, yeah, it's cool, but you don't see Freddy until the end of the movie. And you don't see a
low body count for sure.
It's a low body count. And if this had a high body count with that same exact concept, almost if it started like Scream, in the way that like opening scene, there was a murder, and then it keeps going from there, people would be, it's almost like Wes Craven used this movie as an incubator. He, you know, people shit on this movie and were like, this isn't it. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to make something that is a parody of this sort of genre, and I'm going to kill it. And they were like, shut up, Wes, get out of here. You're done. Get out of town, scram. And then he created Scream. And they were like, oh, you're so great, Mr. Wes Craven. So anyway, I just say that to say that I wish that the kill count was higher. I wish that it started earlier, because the concept is so damn cool. Like if you pitch that now, it would work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The irony, it's funny you mentioned that because like I was talking to you guys on our text thread about like the new Scream movie that's coming out.
Yes. I wanted to talk to you about this.
This year or in January of the coming year, that there
Should
had been
we say
a lot
to people,
of
skip ahead just in case anything we're talking about is accidentally a spoiler for Scream. Skip ahead a few minutes, folks, because we're going to talk about what might be a spoiler for Scream. Because I think this is
maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. The trailer came out the day before we were recording this, and the trailer kind of does not allude to any of this being accurate.
But knowing what you think it might be, don't you think the trailer has a couple points that are soft on that?
Maybe.
Like, don't you think? Because the question is, are they playing themselves or are they playing their characters? The returning cast, Nev Campbell, David Arquette, Courtney Cox, they're all back. Are they playing Sydney, Dewey, and what's Courtney Cox's Gail? Or are they playing themselves, playing those characters or something? You know, who knows? And that sounded interesting and meta and made me think, oh, what an interesting, because I've heard several things. Oh, this is a real tribute. Wes Craven would love this premise. Right. It makes me think, are they doing a tribute to New Nightmare almost?
That's what I'm, yeah, totally.
The point in the trailer where she says, I'm Sidney Prescott, of course I carry a gun. It's like she could say that if she's referring to the character.
Yeah.
True. That's true.
And other than that, there's not any other thing. Everything else they're playing with just, I never thought I'd be back. Oh, we can really stop them this time. It's happening. You know, all that stuff is like, well, that would play with either version. So I don't know if maybe they aren't, if that's the twist, that line is there to totally diffuse anybody thinking that might be happening. But it could easily be Nev Campbell in character as Nev Campbell saying, I'm quote unquote Sidney Prescott, you know. So anyway, that's my thing, but I didn't know how you felt about that, because I do think that was more interesting when you told me that idea sounded more interesting than just the sort of straight movie that the trailer indicates. I do think the craftsmanship and good scares, and you know, if it's well done, I could see that movie being really entertaining. But the trailer didn't really sell us on any one point that felt like, here's the new. I mean, the little door lock thing was a good updating of the old phone call thing, but you know, other than that, it didn't seem like there's a concept afoot, which again is very true to the Wes Craven idea of like, you have an idea behind what you're doing.
We'll see. But it is funny though that, you know, New Nightmare definitely seems to be in line, you know, with like a prelude to Scream, you know, in that way. That
totally.
It'd be kind of like, it'd be an interesting callback to Wes Craven and to this franchise, and even, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street, like, because I do think there's an influence there, obviously. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the other thing you were mentioning about like the look of Freddy, like I think the thing that stood out to me was like I didn't really like the way the claw and like the knives on his hand. It looked more like I think there's an effort to like really kind of make it more of a spirit or an entity type thing as opposed to a character named Fred Krueger. You know, like that this character just that name is like what this spirit has like just taken on. You know, like it's not so much the same character that we've seen in other movies, so it's intentionally to look a little different. But I think that like I can buy most of the rest of that stuff, but like I don't really like I remember even back, you know, when I was a teenager, like not liking the way the claw was, like how it's kind of more like built into his hand, you know, kind of like the bones and stuff.
It's like organic web shooters on Spider-Man. Some people just don't go for that.
Yeah,
I don't know. That was always stood out to me, and you know, on the rewatch, it definitely like the physical difference. And you know, in this series like of films that we did for this episode, like between this and even the Nightmare remake, you know, there's so much physical difference between all these versions of Freddy that we're talking about. But this specific one, you know, I really like the idea of the glove and the knives on the glove, and the fact that was crafted and not like as organic as this one looks. But that's something that always stood out to me too. But
you're right, Steve. It's like a demon dream creature. If it were to manifest itself as the image of Freddy Krueger, it would end up with those claws without the glove. So, I mean, it's conceptually, it's cool, but I agree with you. It just doesn't have the same feel. He feels just, I mean, it's cool that they did that they said, let's think through how this could be different and why, but it just doesn't have the same zing. I will say though, it does go for like the three greatest hits in Freddy's repertoire. It does at the end, we get stretchy arm, unhinged jaw, and crazy tongue, all like boom, boom, boom. It's like, okay, well, those are the Freddy go-tos. They're not very effective and they look really stupid. But you know, there's an attempt to say this is the real version, or this is the stripped down version or something. It's almost like this is a franchise that was doing that thing. Even Freddy versus Jason does this to some extent, where it's like saying, let's remember what this is a sequel to. This almost feels like this is a direct throwback to like you said, the way you felt of when you were watching the first Nightmare on Elm Street, where Freddy was a little bit more nefarious and he took a while to show up, didn't talk so much. It reminds me of that idea that we have now that's everywhere of like, well, we all know this is a sequel, but this is a sequel to the part 2. This is ignoring parts 3, 4, and 5 of the franchise. Like that's a modern thing that people do. And like, I think, you feel that in these movies. Like we want to go back and remind you of what we like about this, what worked about this character, not so much follow up the storyline, because the storyline of Freddy, the canonical storyline of Freddy, I guess it continues in Freddy versus Jason, right? In 2003, that's sort of like a set after Freddy's dead, more or less.
Correct. Yep. Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily feel like it's giving too many nods to that movie. Like it feels more like a throwback to me. Like it feels more like, one of the earlier ones in terms of the way that it's set up. But I guess it's time to move on to it. Anything else to say about New Nightmare? We all like it. We all think it's a little slow, maybe, or a little like it could have more fun, I think that's the very thing that makes it kind of cool, that it's not trying to be like a straight up slasher, but I think it kind of suffers, at an hour and 55 minutes, it really does feel long, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. 2003.
A
Boy, I do not like the heavy metal thing that they do in horror movies, but this one's full of it.
Felt like I had 2 intros. Like I had like an initial like this is the movie, and then that splash of like Freddy versus Jason. I'm like, does this have 2?
It kind of gives you a Freddy intro and a Jason intro. It kind of tries to do both. But I would say, I mean, what do we think? Is this a Nightmare on Elm Street movie with a strong Jason guest star, or is this a Friday the 13th movie with Freddy crashing in, do you think? I mean, to me, it feels definitely like one more than the other. What do you guys think?
I'm going with option A.
Option A. This is way more Freddy than it is Jason. And again, I'm going to say it again, one of the better Freddy movies in the catalog.
Okay, I think I have a couple of ideas why. One is that it goes back to that sort of streamlined idea of Freddy that we were talking about. He's still a wisecracker. He talks a lot in this one, and he's got a lot of plans and stuff. But he's truly vile. Like they're not trying to soft pedal the fact that, like, because it's in a weird way they decided to kind of make him the villain. Like Jason is in some ways the protagonist of that battle, at least. And I think they have to do that. I mean, we see them doing that on shows all the time, where you take a character that's like an anti-heroic or villainous character, and if you want people to root for them, you just show them come up against somebody who seems worse. And I think Freddy is the villain if you need one in this movie. But it does feel like a more nasty, vile, evil version of Freddy. Like they're owning up to the fact that he's a total creep. Like this has got some really weird, uncomfortable sex stuff in it. Just how horny Freddy is very unsettling.
And he's also licking kids' pictures of his victims. It's like, what?
And using that to stick it into a book. Does he have like sticky spit or something? I was wondering about that, because it's not like an adhesive picture.
This is the first time that I've had like a commentary from Freddy. All of my victims are it's like incredible. Like that got me laughing, just him kind of painting a picture of people forgetting about him. And I love that. I love that for some reason.
Well, the concept, let's talk about the concept.
Sure.
So what's Freddy's plan in if this is his movie, which it kind of is, what's his plan, Ronald?
Freddy's plan is that he is inactive. People are not mentioning him in life. They've forgotten about Freddy, and he needs a catalyst to kind of bring him back. So the normal way, because he's been forgotten, he's very weak, and his ability to get into people's dreams is gone. So he needs a catalyst. He needs somebody to basically be a vessel to get into, get stronger through fear and come into people's dreams the way that he used to. But he needs
a killer hype man. He needs someone to come to town, hype him up, and yet, mostly kill. Like
he manipulates Jason so much. He manipulates him like a dumb little shiny kid. He's just like, hey, dummy, You should go to Elm Street and start killing
what does he
people.
call him at that one part when he's a little kid? He calls him
He says
you
he's
ugly
ugly.
little shit.
Exactly what you want to hear Freddy calling Jason.
Well, I mean,
You're
like
ugly.
he's being mean. He's nasty. He's a bad guy. I mean,
he's
that's
an ass.
that's like a consistent characterization. I feel like Robert Englund. This is a real, fully rounded performance too. This is kind of the most Freddy of a movie. I don't know. Maybe it's not true, but I would argue he has
It's so good.
a lot more like time to scheme and a lot of screen time in this one because he's
So
kind
much
of the guy.
scheming.
He's like Gargamel. You know, there's a lot of like him pacing around in his lair, like planning stuff.
Yeah.
Also, the design of Freddy in this is crazy. He's got these weird vertical wrinkles on his nose and forehead, and his teeth are super sharp. Like,
jagged, just very jagged for no reason. Super weird. So, all around, what did you think about? What did you guys think about this movie? That's what I'm curious about because I
mean, I said it before. I kind of love Freddy vs. Jason. I mean,
too.
I really like the idea of, you know, this is like something that they tried to crack for a while to try to combine these universes or have this shared universe of, you know, Springwood and Camp Crystal Lake. And I think the idea, and it's not the same, but even just the idea that New Nightmare was kind of talking about, you know, with like, if these movies aren't going on, that like in that film, the entity basically is like dying. You know, in this movie, they kind of still play with this idea that, you know, in this fictional world of Springwood, like that the parents and these generations have like made it such an effort to like make sure that these kids and that the people of this town just kind of forget about Freddy Krueger, you know, in whatever way it needs to happen. Like it's like there's no legend around him anymore. And the idea that, you know, he's there in this dream world, basically mustering enough power to manipulate Jason by appearing as his mother and sending him to Springwood to wreak havoc so that people think it's him. And, you know, that would give him the power to come back. So, you know, and you start to hear that, you know, when things start to happen in the movie and the first few killings happen and Jason kind of makes his mark quick, it's like the word is that it's Jason, that it's Freddy, you know, like, because that's the few that remember, you know, these adults are, you know, like that's where it starts to like kind of swell up again. I just think that's an interesting like way to kind of tackle these two properties and to try to bring these titans together, especially when you get to the point in the movie where you see that he's lost control of Jason and the teens that are being hunted by both of them, in essence, basically have the idea to pit them against one another. Like that's where you get the verses, and that's what you really want to fucking see is just these two guys. How do you get them together? And, you know, these are ideas that have been played with in other Nightmare films where, you know, there's a precedent for bringing him into the real world, you know, and that idea, that approach feels familiar to fans of the series. So it's not a far stretch to say, oh yeah, great idea. Like, let's do it again. And this time when he comes out, he's not going to be the only monster serial killer running amok. It's, you know, he's going to be faced with this other titan of horror that he's manipulated to, you know, basically now be his foe. And I love it, man. I love that idea. I think the movie it moves so quick and it is so fast paced, and, you know, the kills are really fun and kind of creative. And in the last 15-20 minutes of the movie is like literally what I had been waiting a decade for in a movie theater, you know, in terms of horror, like just watching that fight at Camp Crystal Lake. And, you know, even how the movie ends, like the ambiguity of it all is just, man, as a fan and wanting the Poppy stuff in this franchise to come back, for me,
and it's
Hypnosil, bro. It's the good stuff. It's the good stuff.
In this movie, we get, and I was going to say this, we actually get Hypnosil makes a return, you know, and they really go into it.
Yeah.
And those Hypnosils, like zombie coma people, are very disturbing. But also in this one, we get, did anybody else catch the name of the new, like, we've had Stay Awake and Stay Up in the earlier movies, as far as drugs, like over the counter seeming drugs that people used to stay awake. This one had Wake Aid that the guy took out of his medicine cabinet. But no, I think that everything you said, Steve, like, I don't know if I like love the movie, but everything you just said, I love the sort of spirit and storyline, and that they actually do, like, kind of what I said a minute ago. These franchises have gone to such tortured lengths at this point anyway to make these characters keep coming back or supernatural. So it doesn't feel like you're trampling on anything to to do this, like putting Jason in this supernatural framework. A few movies back would have felt strange, but by the time this movie had come out, that franchise had, you run out of ways to bring somebody back from the dead. Freddy was always a supernatural being, so there's always a supernatural way to bring him back. Jason was a physical guy, so like at a certain point, he's been an avenging zombie. He hasn't been like a regular guy anyway. So I don't know. I just think it's mythologically, all of that is kind of fun, even if it doesn't. It's like they are changing a few things. Like they've added this element that Jason was like super tormented by the kids at the camp. I don't remember that being part of his story before this. That before it was just the neglect of the counselors that he was allowed to drown. But they add things that make him again more sympathetic, so that he can seem like the guy you want to see go up against Freddy, who's really bad. And they lean on how creepazoid Freddy is. They have him. He says creepy things to all the women. He's, what does he say at one point to her that's really awful? Your mouth says no, your eyes say no, no, but my mouth says yes, yes. It's just bizarre. Wow. And all that stuff with like, there's that moment where he's like humping someone, and then he turns around and they're dead, and he's waving her around. It's
yes.
It's just full of like things that make him incredibly
in Jason's dream when they're in Camp Crystal Lake.
Right.
And
then there's that one scene. Oh, go ahead. What were you saying?
No. I was trying to think.
Oh yeah, I know what he said. I remember what he said too.
What did he say? Like
she's I hate to even say it. She's dead on her feet. This one or something.
Dead on
like
her feet. Yeah.
But also there's that creepy scene where the girl is passed out she's having like a nightmare in the cornfield.
Yes.
And like the rave date rapist guy comes out of the shadows, and like I get that he gets his comeuppance, but like I don't think the movie has earned that moment in terms of how intensely disturbing that is. And I think that would be the only knock I have on this movie is that it has a kind of a sort of douche bro energy.
Right,
like
definitely.
There's just a little bit of that vibe to it. But I think part of that, it could be seen that's part of what it's almost like it feels like a 90s horror movie somehow. But it feels like how we've talked about how when people do these kind of throwback pastiches, it feels like an amped up version of what was happening in the late 90s, with horror, because it is very self-aware, a la Scream and all that stuff. But it also is trying to, reinvent these characters in a way. And I don't know, it kind of feels like it might be meant to keep continuing. I'm almost surprised that there was never a follow-up to this in terms of maybe of bringing in another, character or just returning to this, because they have not had a lot of luck with either of these guys lately of like having a movie on track for them. So no, I think there's a lot about, you look at a movie like this, there's a lot to say just because what you said, it is moving very fast kind of from the beginning, and it's kind of packing in, it's having to do this sort of truncated version of setting up the characters, because it's got to service both the Freddy idea and the Jason idea.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think like if there was anything about it that really, just outside of that kind of bro-y vibe, if there's anything about it that really, it's got some clunky moments, but again, I think, and there's some stuff that does not age well. I guess that's what I have down as a note. I knew there was something. There's a scene where Freddy says something racist, and then Kelly Rowland says something homophobic.
Yes.
Like, if you could just like cut that 45 seconds out of the movie, it would be like, oh, suitable for, today almost. But that one part is like, oof, yes, this is that,
does not age well. Yeah.
Things that we were either laughing at. I don't think I was laughing at, but we were supposed to laugh at both of those lines. You know what I mean? Like that was supposed to be the worst thing.
That scene is not.
Him.
That scene is bad. Like, I feel like that was like definitely like a kind of like a come to a halt moment. Even when I saw that movie in the theater, I feel like it does not play the way they think it was going to play at all.
Well, it's an attempt to give her this big moment of taking Freddy. Like, oh, you'd love to see somebody just take him down, verbally. And it doesn't quite sell it. And because of that verbiage I'm talking about. And you just kind of cringe. I also think the character of Linderman, there's a funny moment with him where they're sitting in that back room and that cop comes in who for some reason knows all about Jason Voorhees, and he says something about it being a copycat killer. And Linderman, who's like the virginal nerd character, he says, I've seen what he can do. He's the real Jason. I was like, how did he become a fucking Jason Voorhees expert? He just heard of him, it seems like. But he's like correcting this guy that was just such a weird moment. I think there are lots of moments in this script where it's like, they maybe in the edit they made that work, but that wasn't really, maybe the scene was shot a couple different ways or some dialogue changed, because him saying that Like he's the authority.
Sure.
He's the Jason expert in the room. But that even that cop, like there's something interesting about him, even though that's never fleshed out, that he knows more and that he might help them. But it's interesting to have this one guy who can come in and throw a little bit of facts. I mean, like really, that's just what he existed to do, was just have someone come in and say his name's Jason Voorhees. So here's a question. I guess this is at you, Steve, because you seem like you might be the more franchise knowledgeable of this. Where is Crystal Lake and where is Springwood?
Yes. Please tell us.
Well, I think Springwood isn't it in Illinois?
Illinois. That's what I thought. Yeah.
And Crystal Lake, I believe, is supposed to be in
New Jersey, right?
New Jersey.
Yeah. So Jason's like Michael Myers. Someone taught him to drive at some point.
Yeah. Real far. Really, really far. Really far. It's almost like they did with like Batman v Superman, where they connected Metropolis.
Yeah, you can see it from Gotham over here, right? Yeah,
it's like
I can see Metropolis from my house.
They just made a choice, so you just have to deal with it. Dang, that's funny, man.
Also, is Fear of Water just kind of a retcon? I feel like there's got to be a montage out there of Jason coming out of the water or attacking people in the water or hiding in the water. So I wondered if that was another thing that felt like, okay, this is. In that way I was mentioning a minute ago, that connects back to Jason's origin. That's not something that really is borne out by following up all the movies we've seen. That's almost like going back to stage one Jason, even though Jason didn't have the hockey mask before part 3. So anything that has a hockey mask is a reference to that. But no, that was a moment that I was like, okay, I'll buy that. But it's like, it was almost too convenient of a thing that they almost didn't even really need. This idea that Jason is like kryptonite, like that water has that effect on him, rather than just being he's a guy who can't swim, because you could believe Jason would still drown again or would not be able to swim. But even that, I feel like didn't he like somehow he got on that boat in Jason Takes Manhattan. It seems like he had to be in the water to do that. So I don't know. I just didn't know if that felt like it was something new that they're pretending has been around all along.
So to bring them a little closer, actually looking it up, Springwood is supposed to be in Ohio. So a little closer.
You could do it. It's a little bit of a trek.
Yeah,
I think there should be a documentary, like an inspiring documentary about his walk,
Yeah.
So
the thing about the water.
Play the whole time?
What?
You talk about the.
Somebody just gets on him. He's like, oh, shit.
I think I was going to say that the thing that you mentioned about the water, John, is like, it is kind of like I don't know, like, Freddy sees it in a dream and plays up on it. And then she sees the slight hint that like, there's like that fire is like the thing for Freddy. So it's just like, just like a trope, and it's a way to have all those things happening on one set piece at a lake with shit on fire and propane tanks and just big explosions. It's like, and that's what you get when Ronnie Yu makes a horror franchise match meetup movie.
Man, I thought the part of Jason's dream where he was like walking through a swamp and there's just bodies everywhere and he's just kind of dragging a body, I thought that was actually kind of scary. The picture that's what's going through his mind is and just to imagine what is going through his mind, it's like, that is an interesting notion too, that I think the movie does try to make use of it, even though it's not, it's not like they really get into it. But that moment is creepy where he just is walking like a zombie dragging a body.
Yeah.
What were you about to say, Ronald?
Oh, just this. I love the set piece and the construction portion where that piece is like hitting the shit out of Jason. And his blood is like oozing out of it. And then another thing, man, when they're crazy. Like a Camp Crystal Lake and Freddy is just chopping at Jason's back with the machete and the blood is like spraying out the way sparks do on Power Rangers when they get hit. It just so goddamn good, man. I love that movie. I loved it more watching it. I had a Blu-ray of it that I bought with it was like Jason versus Freddy. Might have been the first Freddy. I mean the remake, and then one other movie or something like that. And it still sounded and looked pretty damn good.
I think that Blu-ray, I remember specifically that Blu-ray or that DVD. I guess it was the DVD that I had, that there were like just so many awesome special features on those Like I used to live for the special features on those DVDs and like the special editions. So like all the behind the scene production stuff, like you know, specifically there were the ones about that final showdown, like at the lake, you know, the making of type stuff. It's definitely, if you could probably find them all on YouTube now, but like those kind of making of things for that sequence, because it is a pretty, you know, memorable sequence for both franchises, are definitely worth checking out for sure.
I like the moment where the guy thinks he's like going to set Jason on fire in that attack in the cornfield. And it's like, well, you just took a guy who's scary just walking through a cornfield, and you've now made him a burning guy who's scary and he's walking through a cornfield. But that like shot with like the trail of fire, I don't know, that was really kind of visually really cool. Interesting. The only thing that took me out of that scene was when they cut to the guy running. Did you notice he was very obviously holding his blood? Like he spits his blood when he gets jabbed. He's got like he's totally got like a full mouth, like he's holding a mouthful of blood and it's like slow motion. And I thought, oh, is he about to throw up, or does he have beer or something in his mouth? But then when it was blood, it was like, oh, maybe they should have gotten like, you know, just not quite as much, because he's like but it was still a cool, I like the dynamic of that scene. Like when you know, seeing that they're basically in a ring of cars at this rave, and then seeing that that's basically a scene that you don't get in a lot of Jason movies, where he just goes into a crowd of people and just starts hacking in them. It reminds me of Freddy at the barbecue at the end of Freddy's Revenge, where it's
one of the best
a rare
Freddy
moment
scenes.
Of that, you know, where it's just crazy. You don't, you know, it doesn't make, we never figured out the logistics of how real he was in that movie. But I think that's another thing that's kind of out the window by this time with especially with all the movies we're talking about today. There's a lot of like, I don't know, dreams real. It seems like there's a reality warping thing going on where we're not really meant to see that moment where someone kind of like nods their head or whatever.
Right.
So anything else about Freddy versus Jason? Are we surprised that they didn't fold? I've heard that they would never throw Michael Myers into that mix because they don't think that it works. But I mean, you know, there's other people. There was talk of Ash, Bruce Campbell's character. There's, you know, I think almost any of the kind of schlocky characters you could throw in. I don't really see why you couldn't throw Michael Myers in. I just feel like maybe there's not enough there to make him different from Jason in terms of here's a silent killer that you don't want to put too much character on.
Someone told me that there's a Freddy. I haven't seen it yet. I haven't noticed it because I watched it. I heard that there's a Freddy Easter egg in the Chucky TV series. I have not seen it. I didn't see the Easter egg that they're referring to, but I've heard that there's an Easter egg. So I don't know. I feel like anything could happen at this point. That'd be cool.
Does Freddy come out and say, "You ugly little shit" to Chucky?
That'd be so good.
Get him crying on the ground. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I would really want to see it become like a thing they do all the time. But I'm again, like I said, I'm surprised they haven't done enough, like, because it, as you said, Steve, it like tripled its budget at least, and then some, you know, with its gross. And that's the kind of thing that, like, especially in the horror field, that seems like it usually guarantees you like a movie and a movie and a movie. But maybe it was just enough of a big deal that this was like, you always hear about how hard it was to get the rights to all the Warner Brothers and the Disney characters being on screen together in Roger Rabbit, you know, how they had to do it. Well, Bugs Bunny has to be on screen the same amount of time as Mickey Mouse, whatever. I mean, I think, didn't New Line have Jason at this point, or was it still like a deal? Because maybe that's a reason why there hasn't been a follow-up, is that maybe it was a harder deal to put together, because the Friday the 13th rights always sound like they're in some kind of legal, you know, tangle.
Yeah, I think at that time, and I think even when the Friday the 13th remake came out, it was still with New Line, because like Platinum Dunes did that and they were through New Line. But yeah, between them and prior to that, like all the Paramount releases, I think it had bounced around a bit. And I think that's kind of where it's at now, is that, like what you just said, there's just like a mess around, you know, who could put another Friday the 13th movie out.
Well, then in, what was it, 2010, they finally got it right. And they remade Nightmare on Elm Street, and they just nailed it. In my opinion,
it's not the way it turned out.
No, I mean, this movie is just like so not fun. I think the only thing, after watching those other two, the only thing it really had going for it, I mean, actually, no, I take that back. Wes Craven's New Nightmare looks and feels like a real movie when you watch it. Like, it's shot nicely. It just feels like an old maybe it's part of that slow pace too, but it just has a nice real movie feel to it.
Yeah.
But I do think that the scariness, the fear, like if they had better stuff to work with and a better movie, the atmosphere of the remake of Nightmare on Elm Street does have a little bit of that modern horror atmosphere where it could be scary. It's just not, like they just don't have anything there to close the deal. But the idea, like just some of the shots of people like walking down the hall or looking over their shoulder, that part of horror movies that I often find is my favorite part, which is just someone investigating what's going on. That stuff, what's his name? Who shot it? It's
Samuel Bear, who's like, isn't he like a video director guy? Yeah, music videos.
He knows how to put together the mood and atmosphere. It's just like there's nothing. I just don't think this movie brings anything new that's really special. And it may have a couple of interesting deaths, or like it may be like violent. You said something, Ronald, that I think is really true that I would love to hear you expound on, but I think I agree. You said it was mean spirited. Like
like I think that part of what made the franchise interesting was that the levity, it must have been something that they realized, but even in the first one, even he wasn't quite as jokey. There's some levity to the kills if you have some sort of like, if he's a little over the top, if he feels a little like a silly person that is also capable of being a monster, that does something. It eases the feeling of him murdering people. In this one, he was just like, oh, he would say like a thing that didn't sound like a catchphrase and more like a observation.
It's like a statement.
Yeah, it was never like, it's just like, you're bleeding. It wasn't like a real, it didn't feel good. It didn't feel fun. It didn't feel like we were looking at something that felt like, and I understand that like you're trying to do a new feel for Freddy, but his face was horrific. Like it was CGI and you could see it. The line of the green screen sometimes in some of the scenes, it just gross. It was not a good movie in that way, but it had the weird part is it had the bones of a solid movie. And I'll say this, and I didn't think about this until I watched it. Jackie miscast. He is the weirdest miscast who could be a weird I'm gonna throw
I was gonna say like who, because let's assume that we're saying you recast it, like, because otherwise you would just say it's Robert Englund's role. But
I'm gonna say a weird one.
They have to recast it. You don't think Jackie Earle Haley was it? Who is it?
I think that
you can't say Ed Asner. He died.
I think that Michael Keaton.
Oh,
I think that Michael Keaton. And
I see why you say that. I see why you say that.
I'm saying if he plays a little more subtle. I'm not asking for. I'm not talking about Beetlejuice. I'm talking like the villain in Spider-Man. The way he felt with a little more humor. God damn, he could be a good Freddy. In comparison to Jackie, God, yeah, that was rough, man. Michael Keaton.
I was trying to think of who would be the craziest news. And for some reason, Bobby Cannavale came to me. Like if they cast.
Oh my God!
I don't know why he jumped into my mind as he would be the craziest.
Him, by the way.
No, I know, but it's like he would be the one you would hear. And you'd be like, really?
He'd be scary because he's tall. He'd be tall.
That would be. He would bring something to it.
That would be scary.
But like, who's got that rough kind of energy like that Freddy actually had? I think that's what they did with Jackie Earle Haley, was they tried to cast somebody who seemed like they have a rough and tumble thing going for them. Yeah. But Robert Englund is like a Shakespearean actor type. You know what I mean? Like he's not he's doing a character. So I think they tried too hard to cast Freddy. And I think maybe what you're saying there, Ronald, sounds good because it would still be a bit of a performance. But I do think Michael Keaton has the kind of mean, he could do the meanness and it would feel funny and mean. You know, he's done that before and I think he could do it again. Yeah.
He has to be able to say the word bitch. He has to be able to
how does he do it? How does he do with that word? I don't know that I've ever heard him say.
I hate it when Jackie Hurley did it. Go ahead, Steve. What are you thinking?
I think Keaton could be interesting. The person that's always been in my mind, like when they talk about these remakes, is Kevin Bacon.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I was never expect. I like that
Because he can do the menace. He's got the other side of it. He's got the menace,
and he's got the build, like
the
this a
wiriness.
similar build, you know.
yeah.
I mean, Jackie Earle Haley is definitely way smaller, but I mean, like, I just feel like he's got a similar build to Robert Englund, and I think like he's got like a face that kind of, even when you put makeup on it, like it's got like it's got that very weathered look to him, and yeah, I think he can be kind of creepy and scary and also funny, if they were going for that.
Kevin Bacon, huh?
Kevin Bacon was one that always came up, and who else was the one that I was reading an article a while ago. Oh God, who was it? There was two other, Bill Moseley from the Rob Zombie movies.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Moseley was one that kept coming up. I don't know about the humor piece in that, but I mean,
okay. I think I've seen this guy before.
Yeah. Oh. Somebody else one of my friends was saying Willem Dafoe.
Oh, okay. Willem would be perfect.
He could, like you say, Spider-Man villain. I say Green Goblin, and I say, okay, Willem Dafoe could be Freddy Krueger, maybe.
I just sent you guys a picture in the chat of who I think actually would be the best.
Oh, the chat on here. Shit, I'm looking at our text.
Oh my God. Oh, that guy gives Aaron nightmares.
I don't see anything.
It's the old guy from the Six Flags commercials, the dancing old guy.
Oh my God.
Oh wait, slow that down. Dun, 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 dun. Oh my God. No, but you could do a mashup. You could do like a slowed down mashup of the Six Flags guy. No, I think that like it is still very iconic, but I do think it's like I mentioned Indiana Jones. It's like Indiana Jones in that the first thought is, yeah, tough to recast that. Next thought, well, if you did this person, you did this person, like you start to think of the fun things you could do, the ways you can make it good. I still think sometimes you want to stay in continuity. So with something like Indiana Jones, there's the option of having like a new character come in and just take over that franchise. Freddy, though, needs to be Freddy, you know? And I think that when they cast somebody, they kind of need to be thinking of like, what if this is 10 more movies? You know, what if this is the new Freddy? Not, you know, which maybe they were thinking with Jackie Earle Haley. I don't know. But that movie doesn't feel like it's trying to set up the kind of, again, I hate to keep using the word fun, but like the sort of franchise that this is a fun franchise, you know, like whether you think it's corny or not, like you've discussed, Ronald, how like by the time you got to the end of the sixth one, you were like, these are bad movies. Anybody who likes these movies, it's pure nostalgia. And by the time you're at 6, you could make that argument, you know, but whatever was good, whatever was special about that, I think that is one of the hard to replace elements, the Robert Englund factor.
Yeah,
you know,
totally. I think the other thing that like stands out beyond like the Jackie Earle Haley, like that's the most distracting piece, I think, of the Nightmare remake. But the other thing is that, like, you know, I think the intention, which I think you've already kind of alluded to, is that, you know, the plan was at least to, instead of redoing it in a way that they did with the Friday remake that Platinum Dunes did, where it's kind of more like a greatest hits of like the series. You know, if you read into this, it's like, you know, what their intention was really just to kind of like go back to what Wes Craven initially wanted to do with Nightmare on Elm Street, but didn't do all the way through, you know, like making Freddy a child molester.
Yeah.
And, you know, this darker piece that we're talking about. And I think, you know, it was pretty well publicized when this came out that, like, you know, Wes Craven was pretty against this movie because they didn't, like, you know, he wasn't involved in any way. You know, obviously this is before his, you know, unfortunate death. And it's just like the idea that, you know, A Nightmare gets remade and there's no piece involving Wes Craven seems pretty ill-conceived to me, especially when you're trying to go back and do like what the original script for Nightmare was really going to do. Yeah. So, you know, it just seems like so many things were like intended, you know, and the execution just wasn't there. Even though a lot of that stuff that vibe is there in this movie, like you guys are describing, and it does feel very mean and dark. And it's got, you know, it definitely has like a mood to it that does feel like more of a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, like even like the original. But something is just, you know, something was definitely missing. I mean, obviously like the script is not there, and it just, coasting off of like original what the original one did and remaking it like pretty much straight through and just kind of like tweaking things to be meaner. And I just think even if you're gonna go in darker, being meaner, there's no character as the lead in this one. Rooney Mara like as Nancy is just like that to me is the miscast of the movie. Like Jackie Earle Haley, I'm not a big fan of his Freddy take, but I think Rooney Mara is like the big miscast in this movie. Like there's zero, for whatever criticism you have for Heather Langenkamp, like she's Nancy, and like she,
Yes.
you buy that character, you buy the characters in most of those early Nightmare films, like even probably through Dream Warriors, Dream Master, like it's just none of the characters in this movie are that like matter at all. Like they're none of them are likable, none of them you care about anything, at least for me. And I think that's probably like one of the biggest misses of it is that like they don't have any success in making you care about any of these characters at all.
It seems like in general that the consensus seems to be for like pop culture that the first Nightmare on Elm Street is one of the better ones ever created. But the Freddy that people love is not that Freddy. He's
Right.
kind of a two or three.
It's really almost version. 3 and 4 too. Is
I'd say 3
is really 4, like the peak of that Freddy, the fun Freddy.
But there's a very big difference because when you hear people talk about the movies, you're talking about the first one, the third one, and the fourth one. But when you talk about Freddy, the character that people seem to parade around in pop culture and t-shirts and stuff like, it is not the first one. It is not. It's interesting how that works, and maybe. We've talked about this before. Mike Flanagan's kind of thrown around and he has the perfect idea for Freddy. And I would love to see somebody tackle it. And hasn't something changed with like the streaming? So I keep hearing these rumors that something's being developed, but
I before I forget, I just want to say you reminded me of another franchise we've covered. There's another franchise we've done where we did all the movies in one episode years ago, where the first one is not the tone that people know for the franchise. Do you remember? Ding, ding, ding.
Sleepaway Camp?
No, Mad Max.
Mad Max.
Like the first, like the movie Mad Max does not feel like a Mad Max movie. It's called Mad Max, but it's not a Mad Max movie, I think that you're right, that if someone is looking for wisecracking Freddy, clever death Freddy, whatever, I think the first movie, I mean, we don't want to downplay that it is like I'm you said, very clever, but it is like before. If Freddy was always like that, he never would have become like the cultural phenomenon that he became.
Exactly.
He became kind of almost
too becomes cuddly. A star of the movies.
And that's why the moment in New Nightmare is so funny when he comes out and he has the same line he actually says at the barbecue. He says, "You're all my children now," but it's like the studio audience that he's saying it to. But no, I think that there aren't that many franchises that have had that much of a chance to kind of comment on themselves as this one in that way. So there is still something. There is still some juice to it. Like I'd believe, like when you say Mike Flanagan, anybody could have an angle that would be like, oh, it would be curious to see what would be the exciting take. And I guess maybe that would be where we can wrap it up. I was hoping we would rank the movies, but also we should maybe say where would you go next with it? Like Mike Flanagan has a take. Like what do you think would be the ticket to making this, taking the let's say Nightmare on Elm Street is the brand name, to making that work for 2021 and beyond? What would you like to see, Ronald? Now that you've been forced at knife point to see them all.
I think pace is we need depth. We need the pacing, and Freddy has to be kind of I want sort of. One thing that hasn't been done since the first one is the interpersonal relationships haven't been done quite as well as the first one. Nothing quite feels like the relationship that the kids had in the first one. We need that.
Yeah.
There has to be maybe even a comedy writer that knows how to write that relationship between the characters. That's important because whatever happens around them is going to be interesting if the characters are dynamic and interesting and you care for them. So maybe at the heart of it, we need good character relationships. and then everything else, Freddy is kind of a feel of maybe
So let's say this is your Michael Keaton Freddy movie. Are you rebooting? Are you just doing like part 8, but it's just a new guy? Like what's your in?
So I think the end is going to be that it's going to be a sequel. It's going to be a sequel to, oh God, what was the last one that,
I mean, I guess in continuity, I guess we're saying Freddy versus Jason is
Freddy
the last
Jason, yeah.
is the last true
Freddy versus Jason, right? So there's another gap in his legend. People aren't talking about him quite as much. And so whatever power creates this version of him, whatever fear they cause, which I think should be a series of like viral videos on like TikTok or something like that, people dying in their sleep. Like it's like a challenge that happens. Maybe a challenge happens, and in this challenge people start to die because this is bringing back sort of Freddy or whatever. And then we find out the person that starts the challenge is a descendant of Freddy. That's one. And that the legend of him creates a new version of him that makes him look slightly different. So that's why he looks different. It's kind of like the legend of him. Like, people haven't seen him in a really long time. You've only seen t-shirts and stuff like that. But when he materializes, he looks slightly different because the legend has changed a teeny bit. Kind of like Telephone. So that's my idea.
Nice.
What about you, Steve? And are you going with the Michael Keaton casting, or are you going to bring someone else in to read?
Yeah, I'll probably go with I'll take Kevin Bacon, just also for the just still have a little Friday the 13th vibe in my Freddy remake, because he was in Friday the 13th. I don't know, like I really do feel like I kind of want them just to reboot it. I really do love the bones of like the Nightmare on Elm Street story. Like I feel like what the remake was trying to do isn't far off from what I would probably want to see it be. I think like something like along the lines of what you're saying is like, how do you make it relevant today? And like, the idea of, I think more of the idea of like how fast cycles are now in terms of what we forget and what we remember and like what you're hit with every day. I think the idea of like how long could a legend live in today's world, before being replaced by like the next trending thing, kind of like what you're saying on like a TikTok trend or a TikTok challenge. If it's not something like that, it's just this idea of like the short attention span where like you can't even remember to do things that you need to be doing, let alone like some legend from your parents' time. And I think so tying it into something like that, just how fast news travels now and how fast we forget it. And it's simply in terms of like how to make it more relevant and try to like bring it into, a younger generation that would maybe want to see how like this horror icon could be involved in things that they're maybe really using these days. You know what I mean? Like something relevant beyond just dreaming and nightmares. Because the other thing that I was like thinking about when you were mentioning the TikTok thing is like another interesting way of like, of modern day and technology is like, you have all these apps and you have all these devices that help you sleep and, that really encourage sleep. And that seems like a gateway to, I don't know exactly how you would do it, but like, that seems like that's today, like everybody's so busy and everybody's so tired and so distracted that like there is an effort and there's an industry around making you sleep. And, the idea of fighting sleep to avoid a serial killer in that space is interesting to me, I think.
As we're talking about this, I'm thinking about like, what would I like to see? I don't usually like dream sequences in movies, or I feel like sometimes narrative time is given over to dream sequences. And I'm like, why am I doing this? Why am I spending time with this? But I think that in this series, I would feel differently about that, doing something interesting with dreams. So I had a couple of interesting thoughts. One, I'm going to bring in Mr. Michael Rooker to play Freddy in my Nightmare on Elm Street reboot. So we're going to have a sort of a little bit more of a redneck vibe, but he's going to have that craggy, like wily guy who might be playing dumb and you just don't know. But I'm going to spend more time in the dream world at the beginning of the movie and have a scenario where you gradually see. And I was thinking, you know how like in Being John Malkovich, there's that moment where you go into the mind of John Malkovich and everybody is John Malkovich. Have a person who's going through weird shit in their life and do that thing where Freddy starts popping up as like a bus driver and a waiter and all that kind of shit, but gradually have a person like, this is all they're like, have the moment when you realize the person is dreaming be like a psychedelic moment in the movie that you've been following. Maybe it's 10 minutes in or something, and you realize the whole thing you've been watching is a dream, and kind of play with dream layers, almost like an Inception type thing. Like have it so that someone is like harnessing Freddy or using Freddy to like get into people's dreams and get information or something like that. And then he's got a farm of people like that, those coma people, like in a facility, and we gradually realize we're seeing the dreams of all these people that are being induced to dream about Freddy because this person is trying to get information or something. But then it just all goes crazy, and Freddy, starts killing people. So it would be cool if like Freddy's kind of in the Jason spot from Freddy versus Jason, of someone has harnessed Freddy, has figured out how to bring him back and kind of weaponize him, and then Freddy sort of gets out of that yoke and kills everybody at the end. But anyway. But I think the fun would be going, what is this, like the Inception thing of like, wait, what layer are we in right now? Is this person awake? Is this person dreaming? I think a really clever script could make good use of that rather than it being almost like an afterthought. I find that as these movies roll along, that, like I said, it's very arbitrary. They just put you in a dream without really setting it up. And you don't really think about, sometimes the logistics in these movies confuses me. It would be fun to actually use that as a tool to sort of confuse you as to what's happened. And I guess too, the idea that Freddy's got some kind of a plan, I kind of like that in Freddy versus Jason. So I like the idea that maybe halfway, it's like almost a heist, like the way Inception is like a heist movie but in dream form. This could be like adding that layer to if I was pitching it, the new line, I would say it's Inception meets Freddy Krueger. So, find some way to really make the audience enjoy the ride of wondering if it's real or not, as opposed to what these movies normally do, which is just muddling that to the point where you don't really care and you can't really tell what the hell you're supposed to be thinking. So there you go.
Yeah.
And then we can have a mashup where Michael Rooker, Kevin Bacon, and Michael Keaton all like a multiverse battle, like a Freddyverse. So
Rooker's a really good casting for Freddy, man.
He's a little too country, but I think he could do this, the wisecracks in the middle of a scary scene and keep it scary. That's what made me think he can do that. He can be menacing and funny.
Yeah, I like it. So
there we go. That's what we'd do. 3 white men that we cast as Freddy. The other thing I was one of those things. He's such a jerk that like flipping it gender or flipping it racially doesn't really help anybody. Like you're supposed to have Freddy, so it doesn't really help anybody to say that he's that you're gonna be more modern with your casting.
The other thing I was thinking was like, and I think Halloween, like the newer Halloween, the David Gordon Green Halloween, kind of started with this as a plot device, and there's other movies that do this, but I think like even this being a podcast, like the idea of what do you call them? Like armchair investigators or whatever, like exploring not a found footage thing, but like the idea of like a podcast or a true crime thing or something, trying to like do research or unearth information about this legend of Freddy Krueger. Like that would be probably like a modern relevant in like inroad to like include Freddy in people that would listen to that podcast, and then maybe listen to the podcast has some means of like getting him access to them once something happens. Ooh. But something like that.
What about an investigation on Hypnosis? What if it was like a documentary series?
Oh yeah, like one of those follow the money things.
Yes, follow the money, and then it just gets into. Oh my god, that would be an incredible podcast if you were to like
play it straight.
Yes, I've always wanted to do like a Nightmare on Elm Street like limited audio.
You mentioned that earlier in this series.
Yeah.
When's the first episode come out?
I don't know,
Yeah.
man.
This bootleg renegade unauthorized, but probably better than anything they've done in 20 years now.
Yeah, we might have to.
No, I think that hypnocil
Man.
element could be brought into that's like a modern element. Like that definitely would be a piece of my thing with like some scientist experimenting on people and trying to read their dreams and stuff. Like,
Yeah.
you definitely would have some drug being used in that. So hypnocil, the scandal of hypnocil. See, I like that. I like that when it's like it wears a different suit. It's like it's a corporate espionage movie that then turns into a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. That kind of thing would be fun to see. Yeah. So you see, we've got great takes.
Yeah. So whoever owns the rights, just this is all copyrighted. We're trademarking, doing all the things, everything we just said. All property of Schmovie Studios. Yeah, man. I hope somebody does something with it soon. Yeah, like the idea of Flanagan having an interest is like obviously just makes me just super excited. I've also read like Elijah Wood and his production company like have had expressed interest in trying to get the rights to the remake or to do like a reboot or to do like they have an idea basically for it. So I mean, you know, just the idea that these are both players in the horror space right now, to whatever degree you like, like speaking about Flanagan, like I love this man. And I've been hit or miss on a lot of the stuff that Elijah's production company has put out, but they're active and like they're very tapped into like what's interesting now, and like, you know, I think that they probably would have an interesting take. Or the Nick Acosta, the guy that did the sci-fi series, what's that series called, Channel Zero. You know, I think he's expressed more so. He was at some point even involved in like a Friday the 13th reboot remake that didn't happen, but you know, listening to him on podcasts talk, like he's dipped into the nightmare of it all too at some point. So these people that we see making great content, great horror, you know, in this day and age, like it's good to at least hear some of their names floating around, whether that comes to fruition or not, because I feel like, you know, they definitely would have interesting takes on, you know, but Nightmare and Friday the 13th are the two that you're just like, when is it going to be rebooted or relaunched or something happen? Because these are the two, you know, you have Scream now coming up, you have Halloween, Candyman got rebooted, Chucky's got a series. And I mean, these are the two titans, you know, like these are the two big ones. And, you know, I think like all of the franchises adjusted for box office, you know, I think like it's like Friday, Halloween, Nightmare, like in terms of box office. And I think that, you know, the fact that two of those three haven't had a movie in a decade plus in some, you know, it's just, that seems like a huge missed opportunity for a studio to be able to get that out there.
Steve, I heard something recently that I thought you might find interesting on that show with Gorley and Rust.
Yeah.
They pointed out, I think this is accurate. We might have to check it, but maybe after Halloween ends, this will be true. But either after Kills or ends, it's the first time since the franchise has started that there are more Halloween sequels than Friday the 13th sequels. Like Friday the 13th, like cornered the market and pumped them out and then stopped, you know?
Yeah.
And Halloween has had like slow, like it's been like the tortoise, you know, versus the hare. Like they just keep, there've been the Rob Zombie versions. There've been there've been like a couple reboots, a few attempts to do this, to do that. I just think that's kind of interesting to think that Halloween has turned into maybe the biggest one of all these franchises for that reason, that like it's the one that they keep coming back to. Maybe it's so simple and that's why, but it still is surprising. Yeah. That, well, you know, the Friday the 13th remake wasn't even bad or poorly received. It was critically reasonably well liked for the type of movie that it was. And fans I talked to seem to like it. It's my favorite Jason is the Jason in that movie. I like the way he moves
too.
And his acting. It's Derek Mears, right? It's a good performance. So, I mean, I would have loved to have seen a part 2 to that movie. But, you know, obviously that'll never happen. And also people have been saying, put it in the snow, have it be like, you know, in the winter. I mean, they just haven't done that yet. And it's like, why not? I mean, I guess you can't have people in bathing suits, I guess, but they don't do that in horror movies. They don't do the cheesecake thing so much anymore.
You can't, but you can put them in a hot tub real quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true.
But Blood on the Snow, come on. It's, that's
Yeah.
half your movie right there. So
It writes
I just think
itself.
there's no brainer things that they could be doing that it seems like, obviously fans of, we want to see something good, but
Yeah.
I'm surprised they haven't just put out something competent and just fine, just to keep it going, with the way these franchises go. Cause it's kind of like a license to print money, as long as you keep the budget low.
Yeah.
And
totally
and
agree.
the movie doesn't suck. That's the thing you can't do. I don't, the Nightmare on Elm Street remake was hurt by the fact that I don't think I heard an ounce of good word of mouth about that one, so
It's a stinker.
yeah. Stinkeroo.
CGI.
That's one thing I wanted to mention. The CGI sucks. The CGI face, giving him Snoke face, sucks. Freddy coming through the wall in the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie is so creepy because it's a practical effect. It does nothing for you in CGI
At all.
Yeah.
Same with the mom's death. As corny as that inflatable dummy looks going through the window at the end of the first Nightmare on Elm Street, you feel more for that than you do for the CGI face that gets horrible. I mean, it's a horrible death. It's a really brutal thing that happens at the end of this remake, but it's like, it's so fake looking that it just does not connect. So yeah, that's another thing that really hurts this one, I think.
That's it. That's everything.
The famous Freddy voice. That's it, guys. Hey.
That's it, guys. Night, night.
Damn. We've covered a lot.
Yeah, this is it. That's our biggest franchise that we've ever committed to and done.
Let's do a shorter one next.
Let's do a shorter one. Let's do just a movie. Let's do a one movie franchise.
I think that's just called a weekly review.
Yeah, you're right. But let's do let's dip into the classics. I think Ronald and I were saying recently, it's fun to do like the deep dive into an old movie. So yeah, we'll find a way to get these, we'll keep them regular in the schedule every month or so. We'll try to do sort of some kind of nostalgia trip, or maybe even go back before the 70s and find some, like Ronald and I were saying, like Criterion
happened
movies
before
or
then.
something. I know, it's crazy.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
There's one thing for sure. There was no sci-fi back then.
No,
absolutely
not before
not.
Oblivion.
Not before Oblivion.
Absolutely none.
All right, cool. Well, I mean, we'll see what Nightmare happens in the future. I mean, hopefully it's something soon. I mean, especially if Halloween and Scream and all these movies are doing so well. Hopefully they do well. I mean, being optimistic here, but it's a missed opportunity. And, when it comes out, we'll talk about it here on the podcast, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys have anything else you want to throw in here before we start to wrap everything up? Cool.
All right.
I do want to recommend real quick. I've said it, I think, in maybe all the episodes. If you like any and all of these Nightmare movies, the Nightmare on Elm Street, Never Sleep Again, that documentary, that long form doc that came out a couple of years back, or more than a few years back, just like the Camp Crystal Lake Memories or Murders, whatever that doc series was for Friday the 13th, like they have these amazing long form documentaries for these titles, these horror franchises, and the Nightmare one is just amazing. And yeah, I think it's called Never Sleep Again.
Yeah.
But if you can seek that out, I'm not really sure if it's on any of the streaming services or if you can get the physical media for it, but it is just amazing. Like what they have in there in terms of the productions and just like the fanfare and just everything you'd want to know about Nightmare on Elm Street. It's there and it's a great watch. So I as a companion to any of these movies, if you go through your own rewatch, like we did, definitely make that a part of it for sure.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, that'll wrap up the watch 'em all for the Nightmare on Elm Street series. Movieschmovie.com is our main site. You can find all of the podcast feeds that we're available through there. Whatever platform is out there, we should be available. If we're not, please let us know. On all the social medias, it's just .com/movie. So your Instagram, your Facebook, your Twitter, your YouTube. And on the YouTube, we got the video element of the show. So if you'd rather watch us than just listen to us, that's cool. You can find it on YouTube. And if you just want the audio portion, you can jump from the main website into whatever platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, Facebook. I think we're everywhere basically. So we say it every episode, but if there's an option to leave a review or a rating or anything like that, just to let us know what you think of the podcast and also to maybe help us find another audience member that would want to listen to us on a weekly basis. It always helps to kind of like push us up in search results or just whatever that little magic that happens behind the scenes is. It would definitely help us if you could leave us any kind of feedback. And we thank you in advance for that. We'll be back next week with probably a normal episode, a standard episode of just kind of catching up on some things. Some of us may have seen some of the new releases. Hopefully next week we'll be able to talk about Halloween Kills, which is coming out the day this podcast drops in theaters and on Peacock. So if you're a horror fan, you want to probably check that out. And maybe we can talk about the Chucky series too that Ronald mentioned a little bit ago. If we can find that Freddy Easter egg, we'll have to call it out so everybody knows what it is. But if you guys are good, I'm good. And as always, you've made our day. Thanks.